Announce to all the people all over the world. Look at our saints, their bodies are immortal. Only Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the creator of the human body, can do this miracle. Proof that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, created the human body and that he alone has the power to perform this miracle. The biography of Saint Anthony. Saint Anthony of Padua, known as the patron saint of the poor, of sailors and fishermen, of priests and travelers, a protector and guardian of the males and wonder worker. Saint Anthony was born in 1195 in Lisbon, which is now known as Portugal. 13 years after Saint Francis of Assisi, given the baptismal name of Fernando. His parents Martin and Mary Bulham belonged to one of the most prominent families of the city. At the age of 15, Fernando entered the religious order of St. Augustine. Monastery life was hardly peacefully for the youth nor conducive to prayer and study. Since his old friends came to visit frequently and engaged in vehement political discussions. After 2 years at his request he was sent to Coimbra, Cornbrau. There he began 9 years of intense study, learning the Augustinian theology that he would later combine with Franciscan vision. Fernando was mostly likely ordained a priest during this time. The life of the young priest took a crucial turn when the bodies of the first 5 Franciscan martyrs were returned from Morocco. The Franciscans had been preaching Christ at a mosque in Seville. They were in danger of being martyred at the outset, but the Sultan allowed them to pass on to Morocco, where after continuing to preach about Christ despite repeated warnings they were tortured and beheaded. In the presence of a huge crowd including the Queen, their remains were carried in solemn procession to the very monastery where Fernando lived. This event, while viewed by many as tragic and sad, was deemed glorious and in fact was an inspiration to young Fernando. So much so that it inspired him to make a momentous decision, one that would change his life and the lives of many to come. He decided that he too would become a Franciscan. From the beginning he shared his feelings with the Franciscan brothers and saying, "I would gladly put on the habit of your order if you would promise to send me as soon as possible to the land of the Saracens, that I may gain the crown of the holy martyrs." To accomplish this he asked permission to leave the order of St. Augustine. After some challenges from the prior of the Augustinians he was allowed to leave that priory. The young Augustinian monk called Fernando went to the convent of St. Anthony, where he took vows of the Franciscan order and assumed the name of Anthony in honor of the Patriarch of Hermits. True to their promise, the Franciscan allowed Anthony to go to Morocco to pursue what he felt was his calling, to be a witness for Christ and a martyr as well if God asked. But as often happens, the gift Anthony wanted to give was not the gift that was to be asked for him. While in Morocco he became seriously ill, and after several months realized he had to go home. During the journey home his ship ran into storms and high winds and was blown east across the Mediterranean. Eventually his ship was made land on the east coast of Sicily. The friars at nearby Messina, though they didn't know him, welcomed him and began nursing him back to health. Still ailing, Anthony wanted to attend the great Pentecost chapter of Mats, so called because the 3,000 friars could not be housed and slept on mats. Francis of Assisi was there and was also sick. Since Anthony was essentially a visitor from out of town at the friary in Sicily, he received no assignment during the chapter of Mats, so he asked to go and be with a provincial superior from northern Italy. "Instruct me in the Franciscan life," he asked, not mentioning his prior theology training. When the provincial superior agreed, Anthony was overjoyed. Now, like Francis, he had his first choice, a life of seclusion and contemplation in a hermitage. Anthony was first recognized for his great gift of preaching at a gathering for the ordination of Dominicans and Franciscans in 1222. After they finished their meal, the provincial suggested that one of the friars give a short sermon. There were no immediate volunteers among the group, so Anthony was asked to give just something simple since he presumably had no education and at the time was only 27 years old. Anthony, while resisting the offer at first, finally began to speak in simple, artless way. The fire within him became evident. His knowledge was unmistakable, but it was the passionate manner in which he spoke that truly impressed everyone in attendance. Once his talents and knowledge were exposed, his quiet life of prayer and penance at the hermitage was exchanged for that of a public preacher. Francis heard of Anthony's skill as a preacher and reassigned the young priest to preach in northern Italy. Anthony traveled tirelessly in both northern Italy and southern France, perhaps 400 trips, choosing to enter the cities where the heretics were strongest. Yet the sermons he has left behind rarely show him taking direct issue with them. As church historians interpret it, Anthony preferred to present the grandeur of Christianity in positive ways. It was no good to prove people wrong. Anthony wanted to win them to the right, the healthiness of real sorrow and conversion, as well as the wonder of reconciliation with a loving Father. Anthony's superior, Saint Francis, continued to hear glowing reports of Anthony's sermons, knowledge, and devotion to Mary. Around Easter in 1228, at the age of 33, he met Pope Gregory IX in Rome. The Pope had been a faithful friend and advisor of Saint Francis. Naturally, the famous prêché was invited to speak. He did it humbly as always. The response was so great that people later said that it seemed the miracle of Pentecost was repeated. Back in Padua in 1231, Saint Anthony, his last and most famous Lenten sermons. The crowds were so great, sometimes 30,000, that the churches could not hold them. So he went into the piazzas or the open fields. People waited all night to hear him. A bodyguard was needed to protect him from the people armed with scissors who wanted to snip off a piece of his habit as a relic. After his morning mass and sermon, Anthony would hear confessions. This sometimes lasted all day, as did his fasting and constant prayer. Saint Anthony's Miracles Sermon to Fishes. The story goes that one day Anthony went to Rimini, where there were a lot of heretics. He started to preach, but they did not want to listen to him, and they even mocked him in a dramatic gesture. Anthony went to the seashore, saying, "Because you show yourself unworthy of God's word, behold, I turn to the fishes so that your unbelief may be shown up more clearly." As he spoke of God's care for those creatures that live in the waters, a shoal of fish swam near to the bank, partly thrusting themselves out of the water and appearing to listen carefully. At the end of his sermon, the saint blessed them and they swam away. In the meantime, so deep was the impression made upon the onlookers that many hurried back to the city, imploring their friends to come and see the miracle, while others burst into tears asking forgiveness. Soon after, a great multitude gathered around the saint, who exhorted them to turn back to God. So through this sermon the city of Rimini was purged of heresy. Meditation. With this miracle, Saint Anthony is in a certain sense addressing all of us. He is asking us, are you real Christian? One of the most important things to understand about Christianity is that it is not primarily a philosophy or a system of ethics or a religious ideology, and not even a cult. It is a relationship, a personal relationship with Jesus. To be a Christian is to know Christ as our friend. Jesus stands at the door of our hearts and he is knocking. He is waiting a response. He wants to come in and be part of our lives. Have we opened the door, or are we still waiting? Saint Anthony cures a cripple. Whilst the saint was at Padua, a youth called Leonardo accused himself in confession of having kicked his mother so violently that she fell to the ground. Saint Anthony, wishing to make him understand the enormity of his crime, said to him, "The foot of one who kicks father or mother deserves to be cut off." The young man did not understand his words in the sense he meant them, and on returning home actually went and chopped off the foot with which he had kicked his mother. This news soon reached the ears of the saint, who at once went to see the youth. After making the sign of the cross upon the mutilated limb, both leg and foot were again joined together without leaving any mark. The first story of Saint Anthony's bread. Many people give donation to help the poor and thanksgiving for gifts they've attributed to Saint Anthony's intercession. They call this Saint Anthony's bread. The story of Saint Anthony's bread is said to have began in 1263, when a beloved child drowned near the Basilica of Saint Anthony. The child mother prayed for Saint Anthony's intercession and promised that if the child was restored to her, she would give the child's weight in grain to the poor in order that they could make bread, a very great gift in a time of widespread poverty and hunger. When the child was miraculously restored to life, the woman was true to her word, and the tradition of giving alms to the poor in Saint Anthony's name was begun. It is a beautiful tradition of generosity and charity to the poor. And it is fitting that it is done in Saint Anthony's name, since he is the patron saint of the poor. Belief in the reality of Christ present in the consecrated bread and wine has often been challenged in church history. Indeed, as John 6:60 points out, even some of the disciples who heard the words, "I am the living bread that came down from heaven, whoever eats this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the word." John 6:51. From Christ's own mouth refused to believe him. So it is hardly surprising that skeptics have always been around. Saint Anthony was preaching in a town where the Cathars denied that at the consecration Christ himself became present in the bread and wine. One of these gentlemen challenged Saint Anthony to a kind of contest. If it was so evident that the bread became Christ's body at the consecration, how about testing it to see whether a dumb animal would sense God's presence in the host and choose it over a good feed of hay and oats? Saint Anthony accepted, so a donkey was denied food for 3 days to make sure that it would be really hungry. On the day appointed for the test, then the beast was taken to the location for the test, usually said to be the town square. Food was offered to the hungry animal. At that point Saint Anthony raised the host and prayed, "Creature of God, in his name I command you to come here to adore him, so that it will give truth to all of the real presence of Jesus in the blessed sacrament of the Eucharist." Surprising the unbelievers and the skeptics and even some of the faithful, the animal ignored the food in order to approach Saint Anthony and kneel before the host blessed sacrament, thus proving that even dumb animals believed in the transformation of bread into the body of Christ. The heretic who had challenged Saint Anthony came to believe through this miracle. By 1231 the many journey he had made and the many illness he had suffered had taken their toll. Saint Anthony was suffering from dropsy and his strength had all but failed him. All throughout Lent of 1231 he preached to even increasing crowds in Padua. But his preaching and the endless hours of confessions left him prostrate. Around this time, Saint Anthony had a premonition of his approaching death. The friars and Count Tiso invited Saint Anthony to go to a hermitage in Camposampiero, a town not far from Padua, so that he might recover his strength. Tiso had been one of the unscrupulous politicians seen in the previous account. But after hearing Saint Anthony preach, he had converted and had donated the plot of land to the friars upon which the heritage at Camposampiero was built. The ground was damp at this time of year and it aggravated Saint Anthony's illness. This problem was solved when the friars noticed Anthony's admire an immense walnut tree on the property. They told Tiso about it, and he had a small tree house built in the walnut tree for Anthony. One night Count Tiso was passing by Anthony's room when he was attracted by a powerful light. At first he thought that must be a fire. And so he burst into the room. There he saw Anthony in ecstasy embracing the baby Jesus. Anthony begged Tiso not to tell anyone about what he had seen, and Tiso respected the saint's wishes until after his death. June 13 celebrates Saint Anthony's birth in heaven, while February 15 celebrates the discovery of his incorrupt tongue 32 years after his death. The relic, which is unique, is connected to an extraordinarily miraculous event that highlights an important aspect of Anthony's life and mission. The tongue is one of the most fragile parts of our body. After death, it is the part of our body that decays first. It is therefore significant that precisely this part of the saint's body should be one of the best preserved. All the supernatural events that occur around us are spiritual messages from God. Through these events, God speaks to us. He sends us some teaching sign indication. By preserving Saint Anthony's tongue from corruption, God has shown us that he approved the saint's mission, and in particular his preaching, which he performed mainly through his tongue and vocal apparatus. Because the discovery of the saint's incorrupt tongue occurred in 1263. This year consequently the 750th anniversary of this discovery. It is therefore important to mark this anniversary with series of events and celebration, not only here at the Basilica but in all churches around the world dedicated to our saint. John 14:11. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father in me. Or else believe me for the very work's sake. John 14:11. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father in me. Or else believe me for the very work's sake. Psalms 96:3. Tell of his glory among the nations, his wonderful deeds among all the peoples. Psalms 98:1. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done marvelous things. His right hand and his holy arm has gotten him the victory.